Lost my point. What was I going to say? It's gone. Get to...
Just edit this bit out.
No, don't you dare leave this in now.
We're leaving this in. This is going at the start of the episode. Not this and the Moody Hammers.
It bloody is, isn't it?
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Book Club. This time we are resuming our journey through Dan Abnetts Inquisition Nine-Trilogy. With this book, Ravenor. We've finally started Ravenor.
Yes.
We've been talking about it for ages. We got distracted by a load of other 40k novels, but we're gonna get through them, all three of them. Hopefully before the last Bequin book.
Bang, bang, bang. Faster than a Gauss gun.
Yeah. We've been reading Necron novels. So just before we start, we should say thank you for tuning in. Thank you for watching. We will get to some questions from our Patreons later on in this. And if you want to submit questions to the next one and see some of these videos a bit earlier, then join the Patreon. There's a thing below. Anyway,
join us.
Mira. What's this book about?
Okay, I'm very excited. I'm allowed to do the summary today. Very important part of it. In 401M41, is that how you say years?
Yeah, why not?
Okay, a crack team of operatives are sent to investigate a new drug on the acid-rain streets of dystopian city Petropolis. The team is run by Ravenor, a powerful psyker trapped in an anti-gravity chair. And we first met him in Eisenhorn. Yeah. Go back to our other video. The case is not easy to bust, and a deadly circus encounter leads them to whisk off-planet, dragging along cute orphan Zeal, to encounter more wild animals. Yes, that's right, it's the villainous traders of Cowboy Planet.
Planet!
Fighting ensues, and someone gets their arm bloody nearly chopped off. Very gross. Then there are some diplomatic talks. We meet 3 additional people who join the crew. There are prophetic dreams, and everyone goes into space, directly into a trap. Guess what? The 3 additional people turn out to be baddies. Everyone on the spaceship is taken hostage, but thanks to Kara Swole literally clinging onto a taking off spaceship to get inside and save everybody, as well as a baddie experiencing a Rage Against the Floating Chair machine moment, our goodies recover and beat off the bad guys.
Beat off the bad guys.
It becomes clear that the drug Fleck is part of a bigger, badder conspiracy. And oh yeah, it's made of the war.
That's good. That's like the action movie trailer version of this.
Are you proud of me?
Yeah, well done.
Yay.
Well done. That's our action movie trailer version of what this is. It's quite an interesting book, isn't it? It's what I found, right? I don't know what you found. I found it reminded me a lot of how Eisenhorn is structured, but had a very different feel.
Yes.
And I have read these before, and I enjoyed it a lot more this time round.
Okay, I found it to be very adventure-y, lots of planet hopping, a lot like Eisenhorn. Found it more difficult to connect.
Interesting.
Yeah, there were lots of characters to keep a track of.
Which we'll get to in a bit.
Yeah.
That's the big difference in feeling, really. It's an ensemble piece. But anyway, let's go through. I mean, let's do what happens in this book. So we're thrown into the action right at the start. We have a encounter with our team. We don't know who most of them are yet. I think we're familiar with Kara Swole and Nail, but we don't know who the rest are. And we don't really know what Ravenor is yet.
We remember him from the explosion.
Yes.
In that massive parade in that last book.
In Eisenhorn, yeah. But we don't know what Ravenor is. Of course, we know what Ravenor is because we've read Bequin out of sequence. And he turns up in that. Yeah. So we find them on they're chasing a guy called Zygmunt Moloch, who is someone who they don't like. And Patience Kiss infiltrates as his girlfriend, and then they all double cross him, and it's a massive setup. It's basically the action movie open. Yeah,
amazing Indiana Jones style, ex archaeologist and everything. And then there's a great introduction to Patience Kiss.
Yeah.
She goes, "That's not my name. My name's Patient Kiss, and my real name is not even that."
Yeah. I'm conflicted about whether Patience Kiss is cool or not. Yeah, I am. Yeah, I'm like, meh. But that's my Patience Kiss is possibly the thing that I like the least about these books.
Okay.
But no. The rest of the story that kind of has nothing. There's a few things in this book that don't have a lot at first to do with the rest of the story.
Yeah, it's not immediately obvious how it's connected.
No, and I think it's foreshadowing for other books in the trilogy. I think these might have been written much more like a trilogy than some of the others.
Yeah.
Because some of them don't come up again at all, and then as you go through the other books, they do. But that seems irrelevant. We then launch into a number of months later, and we're in basically the book, like many of these, splits up into 3 acts.
Yes.
First of all, we have the first act. We meet our team on a place called Persepolis on Eustace Majoris, and they're investigating basically a drug trade.
They are, and it feels incredibly, you hop from Indiana Jones into a very incredibly kind of Blade Runner, detective, neuromancer. And it's absolutely horrible. And it's one of those things, I think, where 40K does. This is the future of capitalism.
Yes.
The planet is so destroyed by pollution that everybody has to live underground because basically acid rain just destroys everything.
Yeah, so life's really bad at the bottom, and then when you get to the top of the spires, it's even worse because of the acid rain. So they're in Persepolis, they're chasing this drug called Flects, and basically the first act of this novel is kind of a detective novel. They do genuine secret agent sleuthing. They have a few encounters.
Yes.
But one clue leads to another clue, which leads to another clue, which leads to another clue.
Track down the drug users, go to the dealer, all of that. Yeah.
Find someone who's been using a lot. It turns out he's got a link to someone. It's nice, and it's like, one of the things you see a lot in this is how this team work. We'll go into the team, who they are later. But one of the things you really get quickly out of this is how this team work together. There's a lot of scenes where, like, it reminded me of Ocean's 11.
Did it?
Where they sort of split up and you see what these two are doing and those two are doing and those two are doing, and they're all being controlled by Ravenor.
Did it remind you a little bit of Charlie's Angels, where they're like, what now, Ravenor? And he's in their head going, now you will do this.
Yeah. Emergency possessing people and things. Yeah. So we do the first third of the book. It's basically that. And it ends with this big confrontation in a place called the Carnivora, which is
horrible.
But one of the big set piece sort of moments of the show.
Yes.
Which is it's a huge circus, sort of arena circus entertainment thing.
It's horrific. It's like if you had a horror film circus and all bad things were going to happen there, and brutal, bloody fighting and that's what happens essentially. They in the pit where all the off-world animals are brought to be killed in the circus. They get into a huge gunfight and eventually end up, during this procedure, they've sort of run afoul a little bit of the local police authorities. There's sort of a secondary plot with the police investigating. Again, doesn't really go anywhere. And then there's a side plot where they're trying to keep out of the obvious purview of the local government. Which didn't make sense to me because I've learned no one fucks with the Inquisition, right?
Yeah, but I think they wanted...
They have to be so low key.
Well, yeah, it's a thing of a lot of these books that for various reasons, the Inquisitors, I think Eisenhorn might mention it, that he's like, some Inquisitors just plough in and demand what they want.
That would be me.
But if you're...
Here's my seal, do as I say.
Do what I say. But if you're looking at people in government, then they'll just go to ground.
Yeah.
So you've got to investigate. So they're undercover, basically. They end up coming afoul of some government representation. They eventually, end of Act 1, they get tracked down, they get basically arrested. The firefight in the Carnivore is so big that it can't really be described, can't really be disguised. And they end up with not only a lead off-world, their lead is some big game hunters, basically, who have been supplying animals and these flecks, these weird warpy drugs that they're after.
Before they head off world, one of their like little leads happens to be an orphan called Zale. And Ravenor is immediately interested in him because he seems to have some kind of psychic power. So you're already thinking, oh, Wesley Crusher or Baby Yoda has turned up. So he gets whisked off too. Yeah. But the circus baddies and the next world baddies, I think it's really good that they're baddies. Part of that is because they're basically harvesting these animals to fight each other to death. Yeah. Which is not cool.
So it's this massive, Roman gladiator circus, isn't it? So anyway, you get this. The second act basically involves them going off world. They're now they're in the open. They're forced to take along these 3 Ministry of Internal Trade agents.
Can I just say, I know the whole internet knows this because I obviously did my research. I had no idea they would turn out to be baddies. I was like, what?
There's like a stern woman, some muscle, and an evil psyker who's really snitchy and fights Ravenor. So the 3 of them are horrible, but they insist on coming along to find out where this trade's coming from. And the second act basically happens on this frontier firefly planet called Flint. which is one of those places where I don't think a lot happens, but there's a hell of a lot of detail.
Oh my gosh. It's like you learn how they farm, they rear, how they sell, how they go to market. Ooh, they're strangers on my planet. We don't like the looks of you. And, you know.
Yeah, it's that. So they go in, they find, basically they have a huge confrontation. Again, things go to shit. One of the important things here is that Carl Thonius, who we'll get to in a bit, who's like Ravenor's assistant, and
never knowingly underdressed.
Yeah, never knowingly underdressed, and also like I think we'll get into it. I think it's a really nice 40k look at a character like that. Gets into a lot of trouble and almost gets killed, and sort of screws up the operation. He insists on running it himself and then screws it up. And they barely escape with their lives, but they do manage to find out where the trail is leading. They follow a ship called the October Country, run by now I always get confused, but run by a rogue trader called Siskind and a big game hunter called Sko, or the other way round. It doesn't really matter. And the third act essentially happens in deep space on a renegade space station called Bonner's Reach. Yeah.
And Bonner's Reach is like where all mega criminals and, posh space executives meet.
Yes, to do their evil business.
And it's a trap.
It turns out to be a massive trap. It turns out that the 3 Ministerium agents are in league with the big game hunters, obviously. And what we essentially find out at the end is that the Flex, which are this warp sort of demonic drug people are using pushing as a drug, are actually a side product. The end thing we find out is that the local government, in order to save money, have been getting computers, old machinery, to run their systems from a indicted world, like a world that you're not allowed to go anymore because it had a chaos incursion. So they're going there and just stealing all the equipment and bringing it back. But in this trade, they realised that all these bits of glass that have been blown, this place had suffered a huge explosion and a huge warp manifestation, and all the shattered bits of glass that have littered the cities of this dead planet were sort of warp touch, demonic. And the traders realised there was more money in the drug trade in them than there was in the computers.
And the animals.
So the government are trying to keep it all quiet and trying to eliminate any suspicion while they run for office next. And the traders are obviously sort of doing this to give them computers, but really they're making loads of money on the side on flats. So that's what we find out. At the end of it, there's a huge fight sequence. People are imprisoned, people escape. Carl Thonius goes through another little bit of character building, and they end up, at the end of the book, returning to Eustace Majoris with this new information, having lost their ship and their shipmaster, but gained another one.
Well, can we just shout out, I think it's her name, Cinia Priest?
Yes.
She's awesome.
She's a much better character than I remember her being.
She has like an earring that turns into a gun or something, right? She's very cool.
And she has to pretend to be a rogue trader.
Yeah. She's like up for a bit of espionage. She runs her own ship.
So there we go. It gets to the end of the book. Briefly, it's like a secret agent spy thriller with quite a lot of action, just with a really different feel to the sort of noirish thing that Eisenhorn was.
Yeah, I mean, you get the galactic feel, but each of the environments feels a lot more pedestrian. So, for example, in Persepolis, it feels very much like kind of Thatcher's Britain rained on. Then you've got the farming community, which is not like a glamorous Firefly. It's like very rough and ready, isn't it? And then even when you go to this space station, yes, it's kind of bougie, but it's all made of fake atmosphere. So the stench of like, it's very, very like kind of, I want to say like 80s UK vibes.
Bleak cyberpunk vibes. Yeah. I don't remember that from when I watched it read it the first time around.
Well, that's what Dan Abnett's great at, isn't it?
Well, so did you enjoy it?
I had to read it twice. I didn't have the immediate, like when you switched me on to Xenos, I immediately got into it. And there were so many little things, like even now I remember learning Eisenhorn has violet eyes, Eisenhorn can't smile. And there was just so much to gather around this. I found it quite hard to latch on to favourites. And I'm hoping that we got to meet all of them in this one. In the second one, I'm sure they'll each get their own flushed out where we can get to know them a bit better.
Yeah, that's good.
How about you?
enjoyed it a lot more than I expected to. I always thought of these as being not as good as Eisenhorn, but actually I thought the bleakness and the sort of the world building was much more together. Yeah. Like it wasn't like Eisenhorn. Sometimes it's very early. It's very early for Dan Abnett and a bit for that 40k back world building, and it almost feels a bit like loads of cool sci-fi locations happen to be in 40k. Yeah. This felt 40k. This had that
the 40k vibe.
Together bleakness. Yeah. And there were some really interesting decisions that I thought worked really, really well. So I liked it. I really enjoyed reading this again.
Yeah.
And bits about it that I was a bit fearful of, I thought maybe weren't well done last time. Actually, when I read this, I was like, these are really interesting characters. Yeah. I think possibly more interesting than in the Eisenhorn novels.
Maybe.
More subtle and shaded.
Yeah, less than big broads. I am this. I mean, I'm excited to read more of them. Yeah. Definitely. One thing that is interesting is normally I have a long list of like, can you use this? Can you use that? But I don't, because this was way more character driven and story.
Yes, it is, isn't it?
It's so much, and that is the beauty of Dan, is he's a story crafter, isn't he?
Yeah.
So you can get completely in those worlds.
It's interesting, actually. I hadn't thought of that. But yet also, they don't, a lot of the things they encounter are relatively pedestrian. Yeah. It's a crime novel, right? So there's like the case of the priest who fell off a gantry and got hung.
Yeah.
And it seems weird and no one knows why, but there's some policemen sorting it out, and then the policemen have the special bureau from the government above them telling them not to do things. And that's like, it's in a 40k setting, but you don't need any special terms to
especially coming out from the Infinite and Divine, where every single page had at least 3 or 4 mentions of equipment or army or, you know. But you know what Dan does, like the mystery, the wondering what's going to happen, the unfolding. He's brilliant. I really enjoyed that element.
So there's another thing in this that I was wondering what you'd think about, because the other thing I think of when I think of Dan Abnett is many, many points of view.
Yes.
And so one of the things that's obvious to talk about in this is characters. Like this is an ensemble piece. Yeah. It's nominally about Ravenor, but it's not really about Ravenor.
I mean, we need to talk about Ravenor because I often think about people in D&D terms.
Yeah.
Right. So Ravenor, he's super overpowered. So level 20.
Yeah.
He can wear your body like a puppet.
Yep.
He can read your mind.
Yep.
He can squish things, powerful telekinesis. He can talk to your mind. He can become an energy spirit and take animal form.
Yeah.
It's literally like, what do you need your team for? Well, we know if someone puts a limiter on your iron chair, then you can't do anything. You're in trouble. But he's really, really overpowered to the point where you kind of want him to have that omnipresent view and show the kick-assery. I found it quite frustrating when he was kind of like, oh, I was far away, or, but Ravenor is a character as well. You kind of hear little feelings, like there's a bit of jealousy, isn't there, or something. But very hard. I don't feel like I know him as well as I know Eisenhorn.
No, you're right. And partly I think that's because this book isn't really about him. Like, he's a big character in it, and he's the instigator of events. But a lot of this, when I was reading through it, especially when there's a great scene after the initial Persepolis thing where they're in their hideout and Kara Swole gets up and it sort of follows her in like a typical morning around their hideout where she goes and checks in on kind of everybody. And a lot of it made me think, especially with the bits in the Carnivora and the things at the start, the sort of secret agency stuff, the way in which a lot of the stuff on Flint goes down and her sort of section where she has to like jump into space and hope to get hold of a spaceship.
Oh my God, so cool.
It's kind of Kara Swole's book.
I mean, we could go back to the Charlie's Angels analogy then. Yeah. It really is Charlie is telling them what to do and then the angels. Kara Swole, I wrote down, badass, saved all the crew like Naomi Nagata in the Oyi-Deng episode of The Expanse in a ragged old spacesuit, clinging on to a spacecraft.
So we should say, Kara Swole and Harlon Nail we already know from Eisenhorn.
Yes.
They're in the last Eisenhorn book. And Kara Swole is like a warrior stroke acrobat, which is one of the big reasons this is her book, because of the Carnivora infiltration. And Harlon Nail, on the other hand, is like standard, would be played by The Rock in a movie, tough guy.
Yes, I wrote for him, big badass. Oh, I lost my finger. Oh, well, punch.
Yeah.
Well, that was horrible, by the way. The finger maiming, we had an arm off and a finger maim.
We did.
finger. Ugh.
And then you get to all the new ones, right? So, you know what? There's one more that we have encountered, which is Patience Kiss.
Patience Kiss.
What did you think about Patience Kiss?
She's always super sexy.
Yeah.
She probably has like, you know, a high heel she can spike you with. Very, very often in sexy clothes that are being described, her super tight bodysuits.
Yeah, well, Cara gets that as well.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think she's a kind of a little bit Beckwin, dare I say.
Really?
Not just in terms of like style and like classiness, although I know Beckwin started life out as like, you know, kind of a entertainment lady. But
entertainment lady, a sex worker.
Why didn't you? I'm going to see what I wrote down for Patience. Oh, secret agent, femme fatale, cool as fuck.
Yeah.
You don't think that? Psyker, always with the sexy fashion.
Yeah. So
tell me what you didn't like about.
I think Patience Kiss, so more even than Ravenor, is the Mary Sue of this book.
Well,
like she can't do anything wrong. And anything she does wrong, she sort of styles out.
I mean...
And she's always got a solution for everything. And it's almost like commented on by the other... Or everyone in this book knows that she's the secret badass.
But
like,
I think...
She could take on anyone else in this team.
So, okay, I accept that. Counterpoint, potentially in Grimdark books, don't you have that one character that you have to hold on that they are lucky?
Yeah.
Because look at that, the one we read, Spear of the Empire.
Yeah.
And there was this poor main character, and everything got worse and worse and worse.
Yeah. And then they get hurt. Whereas Patience Kiss feels like she's never going to get hurt.
No.
She's always escaped. She always wins. She's like,
she's got all her limbs.
I found that compared with the sort of like, I'm always a badass sort of thing.
Yeah.
It was like, I was like, great. I feel like I've seen this character a million times.
Maybe I had a little bit of like wish fulfillment.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
In Patience Kiss. Yeah. So
Okay.
there's Patience Kiss, who's basically the assassin. She's brilliant at everything. She's a telekine. She controls these little kine blades, these knives. So she's not as strong a psyker as Ravenor, but she's still good.
Yeah, it's a very cool moment. There's a point where she notices these decorations.
Yeah.
And she thinks, I'll have some of them. And then right at the end where she's fighting, she's run out of all weapons. What does she do? She just uses her mind to just...
All the little shells from the flint. Yeah.
How clever was that? Because I'd actually forgotten that. I was like, where did she get those? And then I was like, yes.
So that's all the characters we've seen before.
Yeah.
And then we get to all the ones that are famous for being in this trilogy.
Yeah.
Right? And the first of those, they sort of go down in order of importance, but the one that is, I think, going to become a big thing in the trilogy is Carl Thonius.
You know he's going to be a big thing.
He's going to be a big thing in the trilogy. He's got so much plot involved in him. You know, so Carl Thonius is Ravenor's interrogator, which is like trainee inquisitor.
Mm-hmm.
Ravenor was Eisenhorn's interrogator.
But
unlike one of the things I really like about Carl Thonius is that he is nothing like the sort of character you'd expect to be in 40k.
Agree.
Certainly nothing like the sort of character you'd expect to be a good guy in 40k.
Yeah.
He's kind of preening and arrogant, extremely concerned about his own appearance to the level of not wanting to go into disguise because he wouldn't be able to wear his suits. But also like a polymath. He's not a mechanicum tech priest who knows everything or a 90-year-old savant, but he sort of fulfills the same role in the gang as Uber Amos would.
Yes.
So his role is sort of like knows
stuff,
everything, is the tech guy. He hacks into systems, and he's also like the charisma bard, gonna convince everyone by acting guy.
Yeah.
And that's his role. And he's not a very good fighter.
No.
And he isn't this big warrior or he's not a psyker. He's not officially a tech priest. He's just a guy who's very, very capable at knowing things.
I mean, I really relate to him. And I think if I'd nearly had my arm cut off, I would be on the fleck too, mate.
Yeah.
I'm like with you on that decision.
Yeah.
Really horrible. But yes, I agree, not Inquisition material at all, because he is squeamish.
Well,
he cannot handle combat, really.
But I think weirdly, one of the things I found so interesting about this is that he is Inquisition material. Like, he's a good interrogator.
But not what we've read.
Yeah,
maybe.
he's not what you usually be used to in a war game. But you're like, of course this guy has to exist.
Yeah.
Of course the Inquisition needs people like Carl Thonius.
Yeah.
Like, they need these operatives who are just competent at finding information out.
Well, every section that Carl Thonius was in was interesting and grabbed me. And I wanted to know more about the character. And doesn't he pop up We've read about him in a different book.
Well, there is a mention, very obscure foreshadowing of him in Eisenhorn, but it doesn't really give you enough information to know how it all goes down. Suffice to say, by the end of this, I think this is Kara Swall's book, basically.
Yeah, I would agree.
And by the end of this, we've had some good interactions with Carl. By the end of it, he had a serious injury to his arm on flint, which has had to be regrown, and it means his suits don't fit properly.
Can we talk about the writing on that? When he wakes up, he knows that his arm has been cut off. He cannot bear to look at it. As a reader, I'm about to go mad at Ian. Why are you making me read a book about a man whose arm got cut off? And it's saved. His arm, wasn't it? And I just thought that was so clever because so many other people in this book have got prosthetics. Dan really led me down the garden path, and I was like, oh no. And I thought that was really clever writing.
And it's interesting. I liked his reaction to it, which is this, it becomes a sort of compulsion. It becomes a mental health issue.
Yeah.
And part of that is that he sort of fixates on the fact that his suits don't fit anymore. So then he loses his sense of
who he is.
Yeah. If he can't look good, he doesn't know who he is anymore. If his clothes don't work, he doesn't know who he is anymore. And he tries to save face in it. He tries to sort of make things better, and it goes wrong again.
Yeah.
To the level where in the final confrontation where he's locked away with a lot of the crew of the ship, and they're sort of looking to him to go, what do we do? And he's like, I can't do anything.
I mean, I thought it was a not beautiful, but incredibly observant view of PTSD or
Yes, that's interesting.
After something so horrific's happened. Because if I was in the 40k universe, I'd be a quivering wreck.
Yeah.
I would be completely destroyed and, just jumping off an acid rain spoiled building.
And I guess it's a very 40k thing, right? The idea that universe is so horrible, so maddening, so incredibly stressful and dangerous that people build their little safe bubbles around inside it, whether it's imperial religion or it's xenophobia or things like that.
Or taking drugs.
Yeah, and essentially his one is taken away, and he starts to experience a breakdown, and that results in him kind of trying, and we see the first signs of getting addicted to Flex himself when he gets he's obviously tracking down whole holds of spaceships that are full of them, and he pockets a few.
Yeah, I mean it is beautifully bleak.
Yeah. And completely understandable. You can look at it and go, I absolutely totally see how that happens.
Hard relate. So let's talk about the other ones.
Yes.
So there's a fellow called Zeph Mathen.
Zeph Matthewen. Who's kind of backup Nail.
I wrote down Ravenor's favourite body puppet.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Zeph. Also, everyone fancies Zeph Matthewen.
Yes, he's knowingly handsome.
Yeah.
And I've also written fake arm, super tough, Terminator eyes, they glow red.
Yeah.
And he has dark vision. You can see at night.
Yeah.
But I mean, one of the interesting things is that Ravenor can go into a body and manipulate you. And this guy, Ravenor could go into him like that.
And he wouldn't have any side effects.
No side effects. I'm 1 minute I'm Zeph, next minute I'm Ravenor. And
I think it's a lot of the stuff that sort of moderates Ravenor's powers a bit is the fact that doing them to his agents, it's called wearing when he possesses you. When he wears his agents, a lot of them are they're out of action for days afterwards because it's such a wearying experience. And for him, he can't do it for very long. But for Zeph, he finds it very easy to wear Zeph, and apparently that's the reason he keeps him around. Zeph doesn't really do much else.
He just gets worn.
Just gets hurt and worn.
It reminded me of that epic Eisenhorn thing where Eisenhorn is wearing somebody and basically has bombed him up.
The zombie Eisenhorn scene. Yeah. Although in Eisenhorn, that's very much because he does an evil warp spell rather than because he's just
wearing
super powerful.
Thank you.
And then you've got Wistan.
So Wistan is a blank, and I really feel for blanks.
But unlike all the other blanks, Wistan's a bit Jurgen. He's porno slates and bad hygiene. But Wistan's kind of creepy and slimy.
He is, and I mean, I wrote down here, most hated, reads porn, smokes glow sticks. Then I wrote, come on, man, blanks are already unpopular. Don't play to the prejudice. But he's everyone, if you're a blank, everyone's ugh, because we just make you feel odd if we're blanks. But he is just really
creepy as well. Yeah, he's not a nice guy.
Has bad habits.
So he's constantly I found it quite interesting, right? Because it's mentioned, obviously Kara really doesn't like him. And a lot of the books from Kara's point of view, it's constantly mentioned how he's creepy and he's weird. And when you actually get to all those books where he's being creepy and weird, you're like, Yeah, he could have been being creepy and weird in that situation.
Yeah.
Or he could have been telling the truth. I'm honestly not sure. But Kara's like, you were looking at me. And he's like, I've been here for an hour. What are you talking about?
But I do feel sorry.
But maybe he was looking for her.
Yeah, I think he probably was.
Yeah.
But I do feel sorry for him because I think he even expresses, hey, you know, I'm helping you guys. I saved everybody's life.
Yeah.
And
he does. He saves everyone's life.
He saves everyone's life. And I just feel like you give him a break. You know? And very interesting again to see the limiter that's so used in the Beckwin series.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
really
like
love that.
in this. And then we get basically to the ship mistress. So we got Priest and her assistant, which is quite a nice little... Again, this is why I found it so interesting. There's a lot woven into these little characters. So Priest is the commander of the Hinterlights, which is Ravenor's ship.
Yeah, female captain, badass, takes no shit.
Yes.
Also, lucky space.
Yeah, lucky.
The concept of lucky space I found really interesting.
They go into lucky space, which is you'll be lucky to get out alive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is that like just warp adjacent space?
I think it's more like there's a whole thing like in theory the Imperium runs the galaxy, runs the human parts of the galaxy, but those human parts are so incredibly distant from each other.
Yeah.
There's tons of gap in between where there's just nothing. And although technically the Imperium's in charge, the local authorities do not have, you know, it's not a war zone, so there's no space marines there enforcing the rules.
Pirate space.
It's just pirate space, yeah.
Yeah, but I thought she was really cool. I loved her being in... She was trying so hard to be in charge of her own destiny. She was like, I don't want to go into lucky space. I don't want to take you here. And, you know, she was right, really.
Yeah, yeah. And her, I can't remember the name of her assistant, but I also thought he was a very well done character.
Yeah.
This like ex-naval officer that was decommissioned and thrown out of the Navy, but no one knows what for.
Yeah.
And he won't talk about it. But he will, like, he sort of acts like the gruff officer backup, and he's like, well, I secretly wouldn't mind going and hunting some pirates in lucky space.
And then finally,
Zale. Yeah, which is a really interesting thing, because Zale's our outside eye. Zale's an Imperial citizen, but he doesn't really know anything about Inquisitors or other planets or anything. He comes from a family who have all died to Flecked abuse and others. There's lots of other Gladstones are mentioned.
We learn about loads of different drugs available in the Imperium.
And he just runs errands for cartels, basically.
I mean, it was really brilliant. We got like a view of like life in 40k, and it's bleak, you know. People turn to drug use and then, you know, they can't afford to live, and then people die. And even when they were like finding the other addicts, like, and seeing how they were living,
eating beetles on the roof and didn't know what else was going on. Yeah.
But I think I'm a sucker for this. If whatever you have, if you have like a baby Yoda or, you know, an orphan, I just really love that, because, you know, A, they're going to be the eyes from outside, as Ian said, and B, generally something they are they are representing a special power will emerge, or they are the son of an heir or something, or they'll be a really good ransom person.
And I think I've also found it quite interesting how Zale is paired up often with Harlon. So you get Zale and Nail, right, who are always together, and Harlon's like annoyed by him but protective of him. It's quite a nice little thing.
Yeah. It's cute, and the fact that he's so terrified, like he has bad dreams, and he, you know, he has a nosebleed because he's receiving visions of his dead sister, and like, you know, I think he pees himself, and he just shows how frightened you would be if you were thrust into that world.
I think the first time you meet him, I think Harlon goes to get him because Ravenor senses his presence.
Yeah,
and almost the first thing they do is they go into this like Harlon sort of pumps him for information. They go and take her to Nail tries to trick him by taking him to a place run by a underworld crime lord called Jenny X.
Yes.
Which is a very cyberpunk name.
So 80s.
And there's a great moment with some moody hammers being all moody, the moody hammers. Moody hammer, did a moody hammer.
Hey,
looking for a mood.
I'll moody hammer if you moody hammer.
Moody hammer. Which is the other. Yeah, I love the. Last time, what was it last time? Twists and pound music.
Pound music. I was really looking out. I was like, we're definitely going to have some pound music.
I think there was a mention of some pound music, but it was overshadowed by the moody hammers.
Yeah, and I'm probably, you know, there was a mention of twist as well. I'm sure of it.
I'm sure there's a twist.
We're getting used to all this slang now.
And in that scene, like Zale is like trying to get himself some flex basically by selling out Nail, and Nail obviously just kills everybody because it's Nail.
Yeah.
And then it's sort of like, and you realise how worried Zale is. And
Zale's like, what have I got myself into?
So we end up having this. There isn't. I don't think a lot of the biggest amount of character development in it is probably Thonius.
Yeah,
Carl.
I agree.
But everyone else is like set up, and you get this sense of this slick team that all know each other's strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah.
And then I guess in this, I get the sense that there is a team at the start of this that know each other's strengths and weaknesses and have been working together for ages, and they know how each other operate. And this is the start of the story where that starts to fracture.
Oh no, Ian.
Yeah, like, Zale's introduced, Slight goes down, Fracqua almost gets killed.
Yeah.
There's a load of things that start to just break.
There's some healing to be done together. Also, the fact that Ravenor himself is so withdrawn, not only because he has to use this life support system, but withdrawn really where none of the crew seem to know him well. He doesn't leak out much of his personality. There's definitely that distance that kind of either needs to be resolved or maybe it won't be.
Maybe that's one of the reasons I thought it was more interesting, because obviously in Eisenhorn you start out with 3 people who are basically best mates.
Yeah.
And there's a little bit more tension in this group, which is nice. The other thing I wanted to ask about was, what's it feel like reading a crime novel again?
I'm so happy.
Like, it's an incredibly pedestrian crime novel. It's more pedestrian than Eisenhorn's crime novel. Like, it's genuinely about finding drug dealers.
I just think the old gumshoe, that putting your feet on the, going to shake down informants, it's great. I love that, the trope. And I really love how you get to see different, there's always corruption. There's always a dodgy governor or, a governor who's actually a tyrannid gene stealer person, or some kind of police force that's working against you. And you get to see different parts of society, and I just really love it. Dan Abnett's so good at it, and also the crafting. And I really hope in my head that Dan's got this map at home with all red string and here's the twist and stuff. I did get caught by the twist that the three helpers turned out to be baddies. I only had one tingling where there's the guy that eventually releases Ravenor by kicking his limiter off his chair.
Which is Sko.
Is it Dubois?
Oh, it's Dubois. Oh, there's Dubois as well.
So
I did get a bit lost on which bad guy's which.
Yeah.
There's a big game hunter and 2 rogue traders. And
there's one whose name is something like Krasinski or Kinski, which is the most powerful psycho.
Yeah.
And he basically goes into Bauer's head and makes his brain mushy so that he can't reveal that they're baddies when Ravenor's doing the same.
Yeah.
And, oh, fuck, I lost my point. What was I going to say? Bollocks. It's gone. Where did we get to?
Just edit this bit out.
I know. No, don't you dare leave this in now.
I'm leaving this in. This is coming at the start of the episode.
Oh, yeah.
Not this and the Moody Hammers.
It bloody is. Okay, so, what I was saying is the only time I had an inkling that there was something dodgy going on is they said Dubois' brain seems a bit squidgy, a bit crunchy, but it was so cleverly written, I thought, oh, he's a Flecht user.
Yeah.
That's the twist. But actually his brain was scrunchy because the bad guys were attacking his brain so Ravenor could not read it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I love the idea that Dan is putting all these little false, building that trail out, and that's why I love detective stories.
That is the next thing I wanted to get to, which is the absurd amount of detail in some of these scenes.
Oh.
I know one of the things I like the most about 40k novels, and you do too, is the amount of world building, right?
Yeah,
so it fills in all these gaps behind the scenes. And there's some lovely ways of doing that, like the sorts of drug that are used and how they're traded, the ways in which the local government interacts with the imperial government.
Yes.
That sort of thing's all really nice. But there are some bits of this which have so much detail. So much detail. Like, the first bit in Act 1 is the police department.
Yes.
The exact minutiae of how the 2 police officers function and what their office looks like and what their mates look like are gone into, what their uncle's car looks like.
I mean,
are gone into in such detail.
But it's so funny because it went into that much detail. I had such a sense of foreboding. Some terrible Terminator-style police station massacre is going to go down. But then it didn't.
It didn't. And then the same with Flint. Like, Flint is this station, which is the whole of Act 2. And I love it. It goes into such detail about the function of how the herds are grazed and how that has been passed down for generations.
How the market works.
Yeah, how the market works, where the signpost is, where the prices go, who runs that bit of the market, what the walls are made of.
The best time to trade in when the wind's blowing.
Yeah, it's Crazy.
Ian, I have to confess, I did
a bit much.
I flipped through a few of those. I was like
a bit much of the the ancient trail of the oxen on the high pit. And it's and again, I don't know if it will become relevant. I think the police stuff does become relevant.
Yeah,
but the
did you with Flynn? I felt there was such a sense of unease.
Yeah.
I really didn't want the people on there seemed so dangerous and scary. I wanted to get off that planet as soon as possible.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's when they run into one of their biggest fights.
Yeah. And where Carl almost gets killed.
Yeah. I also felt the Terror Circus was the
Carnivora.
Yeah, it was very overwritten in terms of brutality.
Yeah.
Eisenhorn didn't feel as brutal as this.
It is. There's an awful lot, and again, I think it's to lend more weight to Kara because it's one of the big things. Kara is the connection to the carnivore, and she's not the connection to the carnivore.
In her golden leotard.
Yeah, it's sprayed golden.
Yeah,
is the she's how they sort of get in, and she observes a lot of it as a former circus gymnast. So she gets. So I think it's a lot of that's there for her because in reality, what happens is. There's a huge amount of detail about the carnivora, but actually we cut to backstage in the animal pits, and that's where a fight happens.
Yeah.
That's the sort of relevant plot. So yeah, I think Dan Abnett has an awful lot of fun building this world,
I know.
and I there was some nice contrast there. You could argue that the amount of detail gone into in the carnivora makes it a very important part of that city, which otherwise is Blade Runner.
Yeah,
which is quite a nice juxtaposition.
No, you're right, and. I'm just imagining what it would be like to play a D&D game with Dan Abnett.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be like you're in a room. It'd be like, you enter.
Now, this is what I found really interesting about this, though, was when Eisenhorn was written, it was written concurrently with the release of a game called Inquisitor, which was like a sort of
which we still haven't played.
No, we haven't played it. Skirmish war game, which was also a role-playing game. So the idea is you didn't have points or anything like that. You have very detailed rules. You had an Inquisitor and his little war band against another Inquisitor and their little war band. And you sort of fought a war game, but there was an awful lot of games mastering and fudging on what would be the most characterful thing to do, right? So it's a very, very, it's the least gamey of games.
That sounds so like a game for Mira.
But this feels different. What this feels like is actually something that I think was released later, which is the first 40k role-playing game, which is called Dark Heresy. And Dark Heresy is out of print now, and it was also an incredibly, ridiculously crunchy system.
Okay.
But in Dark Heresy, the idea was Inquisitors are a bit too much, too powerful to be in your role-playing game. So all of you are the people who work for an Inquisitor. That's the Dark Heresy set. Yeah, so you've got the Mechanicum guy and the sage and the priest and the actor, fighter and the acrobat. And you all take on the roles of people being given quests by your Inquisitor.
That makes so much sense.
And that's what this feels like. And I don't think this is that year. I think Dark Heresy is about 2008. And I think this is from everybody. Wait,
we're just looking at the book right now.
2004. So this is 4 years before that, but it does feel similar. It has that feel to it of you're a role-playing game. You're all a group of equal level characters going on a quest for your boss.
You can wear a gold leotard, be an acrobat.
You can be a big game hunter. You can have your arm ripped off. Shall we do questions from the Patreon?
Yay.
We only had a few because I was really late in posting the thread, but we have 3. So let's go through them. And some of them they made me think. Lil Burn says, as an observation, they found the depiction of deindustrialization and its impacts really interesting and felt it linked things like the gang cultures of the region and drug use as a coping mechanism to the environment and to the economic decline of the region, which is similar to what you were saying earlier about Persepolis, kind of arguably about all of them. A lot of there are 3 locations in this book: Persepolis, Flint, and Bonner's Reach.
Yeah.
And all of them, it is clear how none of them are nice, and it's clear how all of them ended up that way. And it's usually neglect and decline. Yeah,
over farming, over consumption, capitalism. I think it's really interesting. I really felt that obviously living in times where we're living now, where we're seeing
environmental collapse and things like that.
Yeah, everyone becoming poorer and struggling to make ends meet. What can you do when you have no money, kind of thing. And just the fact that it was such an amazing city, but they just destroyed it to the to the point where the atmosphere, the weather is eroding everything that humans have created.
Yeah.
It just felt like, very bleak, very sign of the times. And that whole, I think it's the theme of corruption running throughout, actually. The Flecht was corrupt. The government, the police were corrupt, and the whole, the planets and the human environments were corrupt as well.
And in a very different way to somewhere like Queen Mab.
Yeah, Queen Mab felt like
archaic.
Yeah, ghost, like old town, like, you can imagine it would have been around for centuries. Like old parts of London, natural, kind of unnatural weathering and...
Yeah, whereas this is very much more Blade Runner, like relatively recent and...
Dystopian,
Yeah. That's interesting. Nathan says, in discussion with a friend recently, the subject of Frauke's limiter came up. And to summarise, I felt that having Frauke be able to turn off his null abilities seemed far too convenient at times compared to how psychic blanks are depicted in other stories, possibly not other Dan Abnett stories. But yeah, I see that. Yeah, it is really convenient.
When we read Beckwin, we were like, thank God this device exists, right? Yeah, but I kind of love that because I think you get quite a clever use. Like, what happens when the blank is taken out of commission?
Yeah.
And you've been relying on that limiter.
Yes. Yeah.
That's a really good story point at that point. And if you want to involve blanks and your hero is a psyker...
It's an interesting one, isn't it? There are stories where the main characters are blanks. Sisters of Silence stories and things like that. And... it's difficult to do a story with one and also have a psyker. I guess the attraction is the interplay of having a blank and a psyker in your team is very fun.
Yeah, and powerful.
But if you do it, you kind of have to have some way of not being a blank. Otherwise, it becomes a load of scenes just won't work.
I'm sure there's stories out there where there is a blank that has a natural ability to turn it on and off.
I don't know. I feel like that's coming if it's not there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Watch
I
this
think
space.
I think part of the whole 40k thing of blanks is that they can't turn them off.
Yeah.
And it's there. But obviously, if you want to put them in a setting like an inquisitorial novel, you need that device. Yeah. And I'm
not mad about the device. I like it. I like that he crafted it into the story.
Yeah.
Thanks, Nathan.
And finally, Liam, which I think this is really interesting, and I honestly don't know how to answer it. I'm really interested in disability. I'll start that again. I'm really interested in disability representation in 40k. Shout out to Nurgle and Chetamende Brasbantis, who I don't know. Oh no, I do know who that is. I felt the book struggled at times with how Ravenor narrated his own experiences of being disabled, especially in scenes where he was using his psychic powers to project himself out of his body. It felt to me like his disability was being used as a narrative tool to contrast against the freedom offered outside his body. What are your thoughts on this and on disability representation in 40k more broadly? So that's really, really interesting. And a few other people commented on how whether disabled people and disabilities are represented particularly well in 40k. My initial thought is probably not.
Yeah.
But also we should probably say that as two people who do not suffer from any physical disabilities, I am probably not the best person to answer a question like that. I tend to feel like in 40k, disability is often treated as a way in which the author wants to tell you that the Imperium's bad, right?
Yeah.
So rarely is anyone talking about the person with the disability. They're showing you it to show you that the Imperium is uncaring. For example, like someone's got an augmetic, but it doesn't work properly because the Imperium tech bad, or someone's has a disability, but the Imperium ignores that and just expects him to do their duty as like anyone else, which is shown as a way in which we show how the Imperium is cruel.
Yeah.
Or I don't think I've ever seen a very good representation of disability as something other than that in 40k, but also I don't think I'm particularly qualified to tell what a good representation is.
No, I mean, I agree. It's what you want to see is, a representation where your character can have a disability and that's,
secondary.
Yeah, it's not like a thrust because for anything else around that. And I think, like as we were saying, 40k universe is incredibly discriminatory against the weak, the old, the disabled. Yeah. And I know it's a satire, but that's quite hard to get to grips with. That's why quite often I don't like being in the grimdark.
Yeah.
And I mean, I come from a RPG kind of background. So in the fandom, for example, recently you've seen people actually kit bashing or crafting their own miniatures that have representation. So, you know, you can have wheelchair warriors or wheelchair mages. But yeah, I think, like you say, it's hard to kind of speak on this, but
my suspicion is it just hasn't really been dealt with. And my suspicion would be, the obvious reference for Ravenor is Professor X, right? Yeah. I do not know, I'm sure many people have written, but I do not know if Professor X is considered a good representation of a disability, because again, many of the issues a disabled person might have to deal with, Professor X doesn't, because he's freaking magic. So I don't know if that's a particularly good example, but I would say probably, I don't think when this was written, the intention was to put Ravenor in a force chair to show the struggles of disabled people. No. I don't think that was what was going through the author's mind. And honestly, I don't think many people in 40k have thought of that. And I would quite like to see what I hope would be more realistic representation. But
I'm pretty sure
I don't know when that'll happen.
I'm pretty sure there are some hobbyists out there who are thinking of ingenious ways to have inclusionary armies and models and stories.
And what is interesting is that what's interesting is what we were talking about earlier, which is as a description of PTSD and mental health.
Yeah.
I think this hits the nail on the head and actually does it in a way that you don't often see in a 40k novel.
No, it's...
But yeah, physical disabilities are not maybe very well handled by 40k generally.
No, and I think the unrealistic stuff that we've come across in this book, for instance, a human losing a finger and not being bothered around it.
Yeah, it's very action movie, isn't it?
It is very much like, you know, it in a way it kind of worships, if something bad has happened to you physically, there'll be an offside to it. You'll be seen as a tough guy, or you will have special abilities. Yeah,
it does. That's what I worried about a bit. It does that whole
glorifies it.
You can't hear, but therefore all your other senses are magnified, which is
a
harmful thing to sort of.
Yeah, but it's a good question. I mean, the ideal is, and I think what's so lovely about gaming space are the conversations are so much around. Well, with people we hang around with, a lot about inclusivity and how can we make gaming more accessible. And that's for, you know, the war gaming clubs that I go to and the RPG groups that I belong to. So that's kind of hopeful.
It is. And also, I think, to be honest, it's something I hadn't thought of. And now I am thinking about it. I would put money on it being the sort of thing that is... brought up relatively soon, because Black Library authors are getting awful lot better at that sort of thing. So I don't know. I mean, it's a brilliant question, and as I've said, I don't think I'm particularly qualified to answer it. But I don't know if this is a particularly good. I doubt this is a particularly good representation of disability.
No, as usual, we always get a lot of discourse in the comments. So it'd be really interesting to see what other people think, or. You know, if you found ways to increase inclusivity in your hobby. Yeah. So if people have other opinions, please put them in the comments. Which isn't me comment farming, but I would genuinely like to hear that. Brilliant. Well, look, that's all the questions. That's Ravenor Part 1. We're through. So we have after this 3 books to get through before we hit Beckwin. Yeah, I know. Wait, are we doing the Magus?
Yeah, because we should do the Magus, right?
I know about the Magus because so many people are like, make sure she reads the Magus.
Yeah, make sure she does make sure you do the Magus. I think there's probably a few shorts in it that we've read already.
Okay.
But let's do it. So we're going to do Ravenor Returned is the next book.
Okay.
And we'll be back in a few weeks. I'll definitely get the question online quicker. So if you're on the Patreon, you will have a bit more time to ask us some questions about it. I think Ravenor Returned has a slightly different tone to it. So it might be an interesting one. But thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in. As I said, if you want to get some questions into us or see these videos earlier, then the Patreon thing's below. Otherwise, thank you, Mira.
Woo! See you next time.
Bye.